He had only accidentally stepped into the mud and lost his shoe. As he hurriedly bent down, trying to put the shoe back on, a guard suddenly appeared behind him. What followed was a brutal beating. Though every whip lashed his body with bone-deep pain, Solomon clenched his teeth and didn't stand up again until he had put his shoe back on, because he knew that in this resource-starved and harsh concentration camp, once he lost his shoes, walking barefoot would quickly lead to infected wounds and a slow, painful death. Limping under the watchful eye of the guard, he walked into a massive dirt pit and picked up a shovel to begin the grueling digging. For the past few months, Solomon's daily task was to dig pit after pit in the woods. He had already lost count of how many pits he had dug, and he always wondered why the Germans kept digging holes in the forest, because at that time, the camp had only recently been established, and everyone believed that the so-called concentration camp was just a labor camp to detain Jewish people, so they all thought the Germans were digging to bury stolen treasures, or perhaps to bury the corpses of fallen German soldiers from the front lines. Until one day, Solomon and two companions were taken to a sealed courtyard to participate in what the Germans called a classification task. They thought they were going to help sort treasures for the Germans, but instead, what they had to classify was truck after truck of Jewish people. Before long, a military truck filled with Jewish people slowly stopped in front of Solomon. Then, the German soldiers began warmly helping the Jewish passengers step off the truck one by one. The German officer even smiled gently, trying to calm everyone down, and told them not to panic. He said the concentration camp was not a prison, but simply a large labor camp for Jewish people. Every Jew would receive a job here, and the Germans would even pay them wages on time. Hearing the officer's words, the frightened Jews finally breathed a sigh of relief, and smiles of ease slowly appeared on their faces. Then the German officer added that, to prevent the spread of disease, everyone must first take a bath for disinfection. He instructed the soldiers to carefully mark and register everyone's luggage to prevent any mix-ups after the bath. Watching the soldiers seriously marking their bags, and the never-fading warm smiles on the Germans' faces, the Jewish people completely let their guard down and obediently walked into the room to take their bath. After all the Jews had entered the room, Solomon began his classification work. They first moved all the luggage into a warehouse, then opened each one and, following German orders, sorted the clothes, shoes, jewelry, and money into separate piles. At that moment, Solomon still thought that all of this effort from the Germans was simply to seize the wealth of the Jewish people. This also seemed to confirm what his companions had said all along, that the pits were being dug to bury treasure. But what he never expected was that when he walked out of the warehouse, he saw the Germans driving the freshly disinfected Jewish people into a specially modified iron truck. Hearing the terrified screams coming from inside, Solomon finally realized that something was terribly wrong. Moments later, the Germans connected a rubber hose to the iron truck's compartment. Almost instantly, the air was filled with heart-wrenching cries and the thunderous pounding of fists against the metal walls. Listening to those sounds that seemed to come straight from the depths of hell, Solomon suddenly understood everything. From that day on, Solomon watched as one group of Jewish people after another arrived at this place. Although he had already uncovered the Germans' cruel secret, there was nothing he could do but stand silently on the side, forced to witness everything before his eyes. Until one afternoon, he unexpectedly ran into his neighbor, completely unaware of what was happening. The neighbor greeted him warmly and even asked what kind of work he did here and how much he earned. Hearing those questions, Solomon was at a loss for words. Facing his neighbor's friendly smile, he remained silent. After a long hesitation, he finally decided to tell his neighbor the terrible truth he knew. But just as he was about to speak, a German soldier suddenly interrupted him. Helpless, Solomon had no choice but to get up and walk away, and under the soldier's urging, his neighbor was guided into the room to take the so-called bath and disinfection. Tormented by guilt and fear, Solomon continued working at the classification site for more than 10 days. Then one morning, he finally left that horrifying place and returned to the woods. But this time, his job was no longer to dig pits, it was to fill them. At the burial site, he once again saw that same modified iron truck. When the Germans opened the compartment, what came into view were the lifeless bodies of the Jewish people packed tightly inside. At that moment, Solomon fully understood the dark secret of the German camps. The camps were never labor sites, they were death stations, designed to strip the Jewish people of their belongings and their lives. Though filled with rage and grief, Solomon was powerless and could only continue helping the Germans carry the bodies. From then on, Solomon worked at the burial site for a long time. Day after day, he could no longer remember how many bodies he had moved. Facing the endless piles of corpses that grew higher with each passing day, he began to feel numb, until one evening, he suddenly spotted his own wife among the bodies. In that moment, he completely broke down, shouting for the Germans to end his life, wishing only to die beside his beloved wife. Seeing this, the German soldier raised his gun, seemingly ready to grant his wish, but in the end, he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he slowly lowered the weapon. After that day, Solomon continued working for the Germans, hollow and lifeless inside. Eventually, he made up his mind to escape. Together with a few companions, he wanted to get out, to tell the world with his own voice what the Germans had done inside the camps, and to honor his wife's memory. But before their plan could even begin, that very evening, on their way back to the camp, they saw a Polish man dragging back one of the Jews who had escaped the day before, hoping to claim a reward. Without hesitation, the Germans executed the captured man on the spot, in front of everyone, as a warning to all who might think of escaping. Even though the punishment for failure was beyond brutal, Solomon refused to back down. Every day, he kept searching for the one chance that could lead him to freedom, but the cautious German soldiers were always on high alert, leaving Solomon and his companions with no chance to escape. Until one evening, the Germans suddenly forced them onto a military truck. As if preparing for a long journey, the sharp-minded merc believed that this was a gift from heaven, the perfect chance to run. He slowly pulled out a rusty nail he had secretly kept for days, planning to cut open the truck's canvas and jump out. An old man sitting across from him noticed his intention. With a kind heart and quiet courage, the old man stood up, walked slowly toward the German soldiers at the back of the truck, and risked his life to beg them for a cigarette. He was trying to draw the soldiers' attention away. Luckily, the German actually gave him one. Seeing that, another man gathered his courage and walked over to the old man, pretending to enjoy the scent of the cigarette. Together, they completely blocked the guard's line of sight. Seizing the moment, Solomon quickly cut open the canvas behind him and jumped out with his companion. They rolled onto the ground, got up, and ran for their lives toward the forest. But one of the guards at the back of the truck spotted them. The Germans immediately stopped the vehicle and launched a deadly chase. As they ran, gunfire erupted behind them, bullets whistling past their heads again and again. Each shot was a brush with death, but nothing could stop them from running toward the depths of the forest, toward the dream of freedom. No one knew how long they had been running when a wide river suddenly blocked their way, and behind them, the Germans were still closing in fast. Without hesitation, Solomon and his companion leaped into the freezing water. Instead of swimming straight to the other side, they endured the biting cold and let the rushing current carry them downstream. Only after drifting far enough away from their pursuers did they finally crawl up onto the opposite bank. Though they had escaped the relentless chase, cautious Solomon refused to stop moving, but then he noticed that his companion's right leg had been hit by a German bullet during their escape. Fortunately, the bullet had passed cleanly through his calf and didn't stay lodged inside. The wounded man urged Solomon to leave him behind and save himself, but kind-hearted Solomon couldn't bring himself to abandon his closest friend. With Solomon's constant encouragement, his injured companion found the will to keep going. After a brief rest, the two struggled to their feet and continued their long and exhausting journey through the wilderness. But they hadn't gone far when they suddenly froze. A starving wolf stood right in front of them. Staring straight into their eyes, the two men stood motionless, not daring to make a sound. Thinking fast, Solomon slowly crouched down and picked up a wooden stick. Even with the stick in his hand, the wolf kept glaring at them fiercely, showing no intention of leaving. They remained locked in a silent standoff, neither side moving an inch. No one knew how much time had passed before the wolf suddenly turned its head toward the distance, then quickly got up and ran away. Watching the starving wolf suddenly run off, Solomon and his companions stood confused, completely at a loss. But as two fugitives who had just escaped from a concentration camp, they had no time to think. They quickly got up and continued fleeing, but after only a few steps, they heard the rumbling sound of engines in the distance. Terrified, they hurried to find a hidden spot and crouched down to hide. Before long, a unit of German soldiers appeared on a nearby road. Hearing the rhythmic stomp of the soldiers' boots, Solomon, already on edge, felt panic rise like a tidal wave inside him. He gasped for air and silently prayed that they wouldn't be discovered. Fortunately, these Germans weren't the camp guards hunting them down, but a frontline military unit heading to the battlefield. Focused on their mission, the soldiers passed by without noticing Solomon and his friend. They had narrowly escaped death once again. Even so, the ever-cautious Solomon stayed hidden in place, waiting until the entire convoy had passed, and even then waited a long while before finally getting up and quickly crossing the road, disappearing into the forest once more. No one knew how far they walked, Exhausted and starving, the two of them suddenly spotted a few wooden cottages in the distance. In desperate search of food, they gathered their courage and crept silently toward the houses, quickly diving into a barn without hesitation. But just moments after entering, the lady of the house suddenly came walking toward the barn. The moment she opened the door and saw them, she turned and bolted without a word. Panicked, the two men scrambled to their feet, only to see the woman run into another cottage instead of screaming for help. And then Solomon noticed there was a motorcycle parked near the cabin. Summoning his courage, he quickly found a suitable weapon, preparing to steal the motorcycle and make a run for it. But in the next second, the woman suddenly reappeared in front of him. To their surprise, the kind-hearted woman didn't call for help. Instead, she offered them 2 military uniforms from a puppet army collaborators under German command. It turned out her husband was a captain in the puppet army. Realizing her intention, Solomon and his friend hurriedly put on the uniforms. Not only that, she also handed them a piece of bread to fill their empty stomachs. Starving for days, the two men devoured the bread, eyes filled with gratitude as they looked at the woman. Then the woman ran to the front door of the cabin to keep an eye out for her husband. Once she gave the signal, they bolted from the barn, rushed to the motorcycle, started the engine, and sped away. Hearing the noise, her husband ran out, firing several shots, but none of them hit their target. By a stroke of luck, Solomon and his companion escaped on the motorcycle, racing down the road. But they hadn't gone far when Solomon was forced to stop, because up ahead, they suddenly saw a pair of German soldiers. It was obvious these soldiers had just survived an air raid. Helpless, Solomon prepared to turn around only to find that several German military trucks were approaching quickly from behind. With no way out, they had no choice but to keep moving forward. They slowly pushed the motorcycle toward the German soldiers, hoping to blend in and pass unnoticed. And indeed, all the soldiers were busy with cleanup and didn't pay them any attention. Seizing the moment, Solomon and his friend picked up the pace, trying to slip through quickly. But in the next second, a German officer suddenly called out to them. With no choice, the two reluctantly stopped and slowly turned around. Bracing themselves, the officer stared directly at them, eyes sharp and suspicious. But to their relief, he simply asked them to help push a stuck truck. Understanding his request, they immediately moved toward the truck without hesitation. Using every ounce of strength, they pushed with all their might. They wanted to get it over with fast and then flee. But just as they finally got the truck out of the mud and were about to leave, the officer called out to them again. Panic surged inside them once more. Helpless, they forced themselves to stay calm and nervously walked back toward the officer. It turned out the officer had noticed the wound on Solomon's companion's leg. Concerned, he asked about it and even summoned a medic to treat the injury. Solomon and his friend quickly refused. At that moment, their hearts were pounding wildly. All they wanted was to get out of there as quickly as possible. But the Germans ignored their protests, forcefully pulling Solomon's companion into the truck and carefully cleaning and bandaging his wound. Then the German officer turned to Solomon and started chatting casually. Solomon had no choice but to answer cautiously, forcing a calm tone as he responded to each question. He knew that if he said even one wrong word, his disguise would be exposed and death would be immediate. But the officer's questions grew sharper and sharper, and pretending to be a soldier became increasingly difficult. Solomon began to stumble over his words, trapped in a dangerous situation with no way out. Just as his cover was about to be blown, the medic finished bandaging his companion's wound. Seizing the chance, Solomon quickly turned around, helped his friend down from the truck, and hurriedly bid farewell to the officer. Without looking back, they walked away as fast as they could. Once again, Solomon and his companion had narrowly escaped the edge of death. But now, trapped deep within German territory, there was no safe place for Jewish people to hide. After careful thought, Solomon made a difficult decision to stay alive, and to give his wounded friend a place to rest. They would temporarily hide in one of the Jewish ghettos established by the Germans. After sneaking past guards and slipping into the ghetto, they were shocked to find it nearly deserted. Once full of people, the place now felt eerily empty and lifeless. After much effort, they finally knocked on the door of a wooden house, but the residents refused to help them. Helpless, they had to keep searching for shelter. They wandered through the streets, avoiding patrols and searching quietly for anyone willing to help. At last, after what felt like forever, they met a kind old man who agreed to take them in. Not only did he offer them shelter, but he also brought out his precious food to feed them. Starving for days, the two men devoured the food in gratitude. When the old man learned they had escaped from a concentration camp, he anxiously asked if they had seen his son. His son, he explained, had been taken away by the Germans 2 months earlier and had never been heard from again. At that time, most people still believed German propaganda. They thought the camps were merely labor facilities for re-education. No one knew that inside those camps, the Germans were secretly carrying out a mass extermination. Hearing the old man's desperate question, Solomon hesitated for a long time before finally deciding to tell him the truth, everything he had seen and experienced in the camp. The shocking truth hit the old man like a thunderbolt. He refused to believe that his son might already be gone. Only when Solomon took out a small list he had secretly written in the camp names of those who had been killed did the devastated old man finally accept the truth. Then Solomon picked up a pen and began writing down everything he had witnessed in the camp. He wanted to send this information to newspapers and media outlets. He wanted the world to know that countless Jewish people were being secretly killed inside the camps. But what Solomon never expected was that the very next morning, the Germans completely cleared out the ghetto where they were hiding. All the Jewish residents were rounded up and sent to the camps. Unwilling to give up, Solomon once again tried to escape, but this time, luck wasn't on his side. He failed to flee and, in the end, fell under German gunfire. And with that, the film comes to an end. I'm a movie enthusiast. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.